Next, we have Steve Rich, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. He's a professor of public health sciences and the director emeritus of the Center for Public Health Genomics at the University of Virginia. And he's a leader in the genetic epidemiology and complex diseases, with research focusing in type 2 and type 1 diabetes, cardiometabolic traits, and multi-ancestry genomic studies. His work integrates statistical genetics, sequencing, and translational genomics, and advances the understanding of disease mechanisms and predictions. And he's been working with Mike over the last few decades on these collaborations with major international consortia. So thank you, Steve.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I just flew in from London, and boy, my arms are tired. So one of the things that about this, so I'm a gentleman farmer, which means we have a large property, and all I do is cut grass. So it's we had llamas and horses and goats and various other animals at different times, and I'm a scientist, and for me, I have no mechanical ability. So if the lawnmower doesn't, if the riding mower doesn't work, or the tractor doesn't work, I lift up the head, the hood, and I look at it, and I sort of poke a couple things, and it still doesn't work. But if you have llamas, they will come around and look over your shoulder. As if they know what the problem is. But since I don't speak llama, it doesn't help. And so, part of this symposium, I have to say it's one of those things of, why am I here? Or for that matter, why are any of us here? And there's one reason, and it's Mike. We're here because we love you, and you love what you've done for us. We don't have to get existential about this. It's sort of what it is that you've done. We all know about that. You've heard it from deans and chairs and various other people. I have to say that deans and chairs love you because you can write great grants and bring in indirects and fund whatever else is going on in the department. I heard that they also like you because you're a great mentor. And I think being a mentor is wonderful, because it's not only for the trainees, but for other faculty and collaborators. And it's one of those things where you can give ideas to people, and hopefully some of it will stick. You almost have to give thousands of ideas in hopes for maybe one or two might stick. Now, one of the things that I tend to do is I have this problem of sort of going off on tangents. And so I'll give you a public service announcement that I'm trying to keep it sort of tight by having everything written down. But at a certain point, I'll say, oh, sorry, I digress. And I'll get back to the point. Because, it's like the history of genetics and human genetics is so vast and so deep. And those of us that reach a certain age, like Mike's age, have seen a lot. And we've actually learned a lot. And learned a lot from very diverse people, some of whom Mark didn't mention by name because they're somewhat odd. But character manipulation aside, you learn a lot of stuff, and you try to give your insights to your students and trainees and so forth. And one of the problems I have is I'll start giving a point, and then I'll go off because Newt Morton said this, and because what Newt said, Robert had to respond, and because of that, it kept going around in circles. And I'll admit now, I'm a Deadhead, so I like the Grateful Dead, and they go off on improvisation, and eventually they get back to the real song. And jazz musicians, Miles Davis, all of a sudden they'll go off in a different direction and come back to the song. So I try to get back to the point eventually. So part of that is, this is for Mike, and so Mike is very direct. There's none of this wandering off in decades, what happened ago, and he'll get to the point, and will be very nice about telling students, well, this is what I might do, and you have your approach too, but that's how that goes. One of the things about the symposium is that during the ASHG meeting in Denver, Mike and Nancy and I had our usual time together at lunch, and wide-ranging discussion. It was a great lunch, possibly with wine. I can't remember exactly, but it's possible. At one point, each of us made the comment, after all these years, we've been pretty well paid, and we're pretty well off financially. And at that point, Mike said something that changed my life to a great extent. And you know what? I'm only going to go first class, and I'm going to buy wine that's more expensive. And I said, holy crap, I could do that. So during the pandemic, I digress. During the pandemic, my wife and I went to Wegmans to buy groceries every 2 weeks at 7 a.m. on the Sunday morning. Partly because we didn't want to get COVID. And no one's in the grocery store in their right mind at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And in fact, we didn't get COVID during that period. I got COVID attending the ADA meeting. And so that was, a problem there. But what it did was it introduced us to having a glass of wine every night for dinner. And, so you could buy wine in Wegmans wine area. And I had this tendency of buying $10 to $15 bottles of wine. Well, after hearing Mike, I'm now buying $15 to $20 bottles of wine. So there's one of the things that always struck me about Mike and his approach to science, and that he was, you think about statistical genetics and, doing things and developing some algorithms and expanding sort of incrementally on some stuff. But Mike had a way of seeing things differently and identifying really important problems. And this is my Grateful Dead sticker. And so it reminded me of a song from the Grateful Dead. It's this vision and clarity of thinking. There's a song called Scarlet Begonias. So, everyone should hear Scarlet Begonias. It's maybe 5 minutes on their album. It can go for days if you listen to it live. So this is Scarlet Begonias, lyrics by Robert Hunter, music by Jerry Garcia. And I think it sort of summarizes Mike's approach. Well, I ain't always right, but I've never been wrong. Seldom turns out the way it does in a song. Once in a while, you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And so it must be Mike is looking at things very strangely in different places, because he's come up with solutions to problems that I don't think people would recognize. By the way, this is the Live Dead album cover that introduced me to the Grateful Dead in 1970. And I actually went to a Grateful Dead concert in 1971 at Duke University, where Beth Hauser and Mike Hauser are now located. I don't think you were there in 1971. Almost, though. It really had no effect on me. No effect on me. No effect on me. No. I mean, this was, a good concert. In retrospect, I realized that the Dead were in Palo Alto, which is where Stanford is located, which is now in the Atlantic Coast Conference, of all strange things. And that their road crew, which were psychedelic cowboys, were all from Oregon. And so I was just thinking, oh, here's a connection between Mike and the Grateful Dead. So it may be that his growing up in Oregon, the undergraduate experience at the University of Oregon, that was all related to the psychedelic cowboy and his perpetual good humor and thinking of outside the box. Now it makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that talk about when you go to some of these types of symposia for people who may or may not retire, is that you start thinking, well, when was the first time you met so-and-so? And, so that caused me to do a bit more research. Now, granted, one thing Mike has always said about me is that I have a good memory. And, I tend to remember strange things, like, who published this at what time and who said this at what meeting. The time that, all the stuff about doing RFLPs and developing a genetic map. I was at the American Society of Human Genetics Conference in Salt Lake City and various things like that have no importance whatsoever. But it made me think, okay, well, when was it the first time I met Mike? And it started having me do some research. So I decided to do a PubMed search. And this is the first paper that actually had M. Boehnke on it. Now, if you look at it, it's radiation research in 1958, bone density studies with a gamma gauge, and M. Boehnke was the senior author, which I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Now, I knew Mike was productive. I mean, has a tremendous publication list. But in 1958, it then sort of caused me to think a bit more because that's a really early start. And this especially because Mike was born in 1956. Now, I figure like most papers, it takes a while to write. To research, to write, to edit, and you know how much Mike likes to edit. Probably get a revise and resubmit, so you had to revise the paper, resubmit it, and that meant it probably had to take a couple years, so you were really active from the womb on to the rest of your life. Then I really discovered one additional fact, and this was Manfred Boehnke, from Department of Radiology at University of Pittsburgh, where Dan is. And so, there's another connection there, being from the Ken Lang School. But it also means maybe Manfred Boehnke, is that a relative? I couldn't tell. But it is an interesting fact that I have a similar problem in that if you do a search on SS Rich, it goes back into the 60s. And I'm old, but I'm not that old. But there are numerous papers, SS Rich and RR Rich. Susan Soliday Rich and Robert R. Rich. And those two, wife and husband, both immunologists at Baylor. Also then at Emory, where Mike is from. And then he went to UAB and became dean of a school of medicine. They studied T lymphocytes and the immune response. And actually, I ended up on a site visit chaired by Robert Rich. And so he sort of looked at me and said, well, you aren't my wife after all. And I was somewhat taken as a geneticist and a phenotyper that here's another fairly short, balding, somewhat overweight person named Rich. And it met the family description, so we may be connected at some point. I think one of the other things about more checking, as you've seen, is this paper. And this is, I think, your first paper officially. And it was when you were a student in the what was it called, bio-math program at UCLA. Now, unlike Gonzalo, who really could care less about this stuff, I do with type 1 diabetes, and HLA is the gorilla in the room. And HLA-D typing was fabulous. It's what we use, actually, mixed lymphocyte typing. And so I really like this paper. and the thing is, there's another connection here. So when I I led the Type 1 Diabetes Genetics Consortium, one of the people that was part of that consortium was Pat Concannon. Pat Concannon was at Benaroya Research, at that time Virginia Mason, in Seattle, the appointment in immunology at UW. And Pat has worked with Nancy and Graham on type 2 and worked with various other aspects, but also type 1. However, he is an expert in DNA repair and damage. And so one of his areas of research was ataxia telangiectasia. And he basically ran the resource for AT with Gaddy. And so for years, I was getting stories about what Gaddy said or what Gaddy did this time. And so I suspect that Mike might have some Gaddy stories as well. But that was another interesting thing that happened. Mike's first paper in the Lang group, as you've seen before, it's interesting how people converge. This is evolutionary convergence of some sort. This is the paper that how many polymorphic genes will it take? And I think Mark showed this as well. And so this is, I think your first paper with Ken at that point. And I read that. That's the other thing that we used to do is we go look up a paper in the library. And I think people here remember what libraries are. You go into a health science library, you go through, you find a journal, you pick out the whole year or 2 years, and you sit down, you find the paper, but then you spend the next hour and a half going back through every issue of that damn journal to see what the other papers were. We don't do that anymore. In fact, I don't even know if libraries have books anymore. It's basically all electronic. But this paper was in the biomath program. Actually, I met Carol Newton at one point in the 80s when I was at Minnesota. She came and did I guess a seminar or something in the department in laboratory medicine pathology. And that's another connection that we had is meeting Carol Newton, who was chair of biomath at UCLA during that time. An interesting conversation about this is that with this paper, Mark showed it and all about the different types of characterization of how much it's going to take. What I liked is the summary, because in summary then, the original argument promotes too optimistic a view of how much work it will take to span the human genome with polymorphic markers. Adopting a divide and conquer strategy of proceeding chromosome by chromosome helps matters considerably. Still, human geneticists will need patience, persistence, luck, and a willingness to settle for a less than complete genetic map. Filling the last few gaps of the map will be a slow, frustrating process. I think that was pretty, amazing to number one, have an editor let some of that crap get through. But also just the recognition that it's probably going to take a long time and frustration and divide and conquer. The other thing that I found fascinating was the acknowledgement. We would like to thank Richard Gaddy, Steve Bethiste, and Ann Spence for their helpful suggestions and for pointing out some of the references. We also wish to thank Ray White and Mark Skolnick for calling to our attention similar work carried out by another group concurrently and independently of us, a paper by Williamson, Cannings, Bishop, and Skolnick in preparation. So, this has just floored me. Well, this is, American Journal of Human Genetics back in the 80s, right? And you have people who are working in the same area, seeing your paper saying, oh, we better do something like this, or we're thinking about it, let's do it. And so suddenly they have a paper in preparation.
I thought we made the message
The other thing, when you look at these papers, you see acknowledgments about things, and it reminds you, Ann Spence. I hadn't thought about Ann Spence in ages. And actually, Ann Spence is one of the reasons I went to Minnesota, because she reviewed a grant that the people in endocrinology working in type 1 diabetes had proposed. And at the time, she said, you don't have any help in analysis of data. You need to hire a geneticist, and also maybe get a consultant like Newton Morton. So I was hired to basically fill that spot, and it also sort of had me be a Morton acolyte for a while. Actually, Dan, did you publish like a Morton, it was a Morton-Elston number or something like that?
Morton number, yeah.
A Morton number. Can you define that?
It's the same thing as the Kevin Bacon number. It's the, how many, are you a co-auth, how many co-auth distances are you from Morton?
Yeah.
And I took the Allen Award winners and looked at how their numbers, they were very low.
Yeah. And at one time, there were, I think there were two people.
And inversely correlated to the Elston number.
Yeah. Oh, the Bacon number is how many people from you to Kevin Bacon?
Yeah, but the combined Bacon number.
Oh,
So Jonathan Pritchard has one of the lowest Bacon numbers. You know Jonathan Pritchard?
yeah.
Because he, has a low number, but he also played a runner in a movie. It gives him a low Bacon number. And he's lower than Natalie Portman.
It was a movie about Steve Prefontaine.
Yeah, that's it.
So one of the things that I realized was when Dan did this, there were, I think at one point, two people who had published with both Morton and Elston. One was D.C. Rao, and one was me. And so it was a really interesting process because, I tend to get along with everyone, I guess, even Newton Morton and Robert Elston. D.C. actually was a joint author on a paper with Elston and Morton and D.C. Rao, which I can't imagine anyone doing that. Did John Mark? Yeah. So I digress. Going back to when did I meet Mike? I can't really remember. I do remember early. So the first time I met true faculty from Michigan was in 1980. I was being recruited to Minnesota and went to a conference where I met Charlie Singh, Eric Boehnke, Craig Hannes, and Pat Pizer. And I can just remember talking to these guys, and Pat was so nervous that she could hardly contain herself because she had to give a talk in front of all these people. It was an epilepsy conference. Ray White was there, Mark Leppert. And so, it was one of those conferences, and I spent ages talking with Charlie about tractors. As you know, Charlie had this amazing popcorn stuff, and he's loved to have tractors. He had all sorts of Massey Ferguson, Ford tractors, and all sorts of tractors. And because I'm from North Carolina, I must know about tractors. I grew up in Burlington, North Carolina, which is a city. The only time I went outside the city was to visit my grandparents, who lived on a little farm where I could pick strawberries and pick grapes and eat the strawberries and eat the grapes, and then go have something like country fried chicken and grits and stuff like that. So I had no idea about tractors. And besides, I'm horrible with mechanics. But Charlie enjoyed it, so that was an important part. I think there was a time, though, that Mike visited University of Minnesota. I think gave a seminar. Maybe I hosted it. And so at the end of that, it wasn't winter because I could get the car started. And we have these periods of weeks at a time when the high temperature was below zero. And so I remember getting Mike to the parking ramp in the car. As we were leaving, Mike asked me a question. He said, "Let me ask you a question." Okay. He said, if one were to study diabetes, which one would you do, type 1 or type 2? Because Francis is looking to work on diabetes after he finds the breast cancer gene. And so, I have this problem of when I drive to work, I start thinking about things. And it must be muscle memory or something, because I get to work and I don't realize I've driven there. I park and I go off. And when I drive back from work, I'm usually listening to the Grateful Dead channel on Sirius XM or something. And I get caught up in things or thinking about things. And I don't remember actually driving home. So when I took Mike was going to take him at the airport, and he asked me this question, it triggers a data dump, because I can talk about type 1 diabetes forever. And so I said, well, there are differences because people think type 1 diabetes is autoimmune, and the type 2 diabetes is more insulin resistance and sensitivity, and the risk of type 1 diabetes in the general population is like 1 in 4 per thousand. It's much more common, and type 2 diabetes is much more common, and type 1 is more of an issue of people think more in terms of European ancestry. Type 2, there's multiple ancestries. Then you get into the genetic risk ratios, and the lambda sub-S for type 1 is 16, maybe for type 2, 2 to 4, and the next thing I know, I'm almost home. Not at the airport at all. And it was, and the thing that happened is that, just like the Grateful Dead and just like Miles Davis, I realized, okay, stay calm. You're almost home, but you can know how to get to the airport. And so we got to the airport, and no one knew the better for that. It did take a little bit longer than planned, but I think you got the information you needed, because a little bit later, basically, after all that summary, what happened was that there was a meeting that was held, and I don't know if it was in DC proper or if it was in Bethesda, but it was in some hotel. And I was invited to attend this meeting where there was a bunch of people. And during the time, Francis was going through the process of being appointed as director of the National Center for Human Genome Research, and that was probably April 1993. So I have to say that it was an interesting meeting. I was sitting close to Francis, and he pushed a little note over to my side, and he said, "Lambda sub-S for T1D and T2D." Or NIDDM and IDDM. And it was, okay, 16, 2 to 4, pushed it back. And one of the interesting things was that there were people there who had samples and resources and access to data and so forth. And it was really the Finns that had everything ready to go. And the family structures could be there. And so I think that was when it was started. And Fusion, Finland, United States investigation of NIDDM genetics, which goes back to historic times, because diabetes has been classified differently for ages. In the 70s, it was juvenile diabetes and adult onset diabetes, and then IDDM, insulin-dependent diabetes, and non-insulin-dependent diabetes, and now it's type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, and we don't know what the hell it is. So I think one of the things is that time doesn't change nomenclature as much as HLA, because HLA gets changed every few years. But Mike always stays cheerful, engaging, also recognizable by his height, by his hair, except for that one period where you had the mustache. It's pretty well clean shaven, very photogenic, by the way. I have to say, almost all the pictures of me that I've found on the internet have me holding a glass. I don't know how that happens, but there's a picture of me at Newton's either 70th or 80th birthday celebration. And, here I am holding a glass of wine, talking to Newton. There's another picture of me at a charge consortium meeting of the steering committee. Here I am holding a glass of wine. There's no bottles around here that I can see, unfortunately. So one of the things that is true is that Mike is not really a snazzy dresser. And I saw pictures of you with a suit and tie, and I fear it's Photoshopped, or AI. Mark had a much better AI figure of you. But I think that this is sort of how I vision Mike, or in the sort of the plaid shirt, which I've seen before, or in the one that's just solid blue. Now, I have to say, I have a closet full of blue shirts. So I shouldn't be saying this, but I will anyway. There's one with stripes, plaid, most knits. But, here's one that actually Mark had used, which I think is a nice picture. I mean, he's very tan. You spend a lot of time on the beach, I think. And then this was one I really liked. Because it has, you and Kevin, and it's just the family in a sense. But again, the clothing is fairly, constrained. Now, I did do a literature search or a search on Google about, how people's lifestyle changes with retirement, and I looked up some poems. And there's one poem about a woman who retired and then started wearing red hats and drinking gin and tonics and then stealing flowers from neighbors' gardens and then running along fences with a stick and making sounds and really going through a lot of changes. I don't see you doing exactly that, but you could suddenly become a fashionista. And so I found another song that I'll quote a little bit from the Kinks, that he's a dedicated follower of fashion. They seek him here, they seek him there. His clothes are loud, but never square. It will make or break him, so he's got to buy the best, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion. And when he does his little rounds round the boutiques of London town, eagerly pursuing all the latest fads and trends, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. He thinks he is a flower to be looked at. And when he pulls his frilly nylon panties right up tight, he feels a dedicated follower of fashion. Oh, yes, he is. There's one thing that he loves, and that is flattery. One week he's in polka dots, the next week he's in stripe, because he's a dedicated follower of fashion. I somehow don't think you'll go quite that far. Somehow it is sort of difficult to see how things may change after retirement, although retirement may not be exactly what we're talking about. But just in case, what would he do? Think about it. What does anyone do when they retire? I'll just, spend time playing my guitars probably. But it's, so I did a check, and I found the top 10 things, according to Keen Wealth Advisors, that people retire to. Number 10, relocating to a new area or in a retirement community. I don't think so. Not if you have kids and grandchildren nearby, so that's out. 9, physical fitness and wellness activities. Well, good Lord, you're fit as a fiddle, and you run and yoga and anything else, so that's out. Number 8, writing, blogging, and creative pursuits. Well, you already write, and I don't know you blog, but you might want to check on that, but, why do that more? Yeah, it's crazy. Number 7, gardening and home improvement. Well, you can always get another hot tub, I guess. Number 6, part-time or consulting work in your field of expertise. Gosh, I remember we had a phone conversation of years ago. I said, gosh, what's all this stuff in the background? Oh, that's birds. You know, the birds are chirping. I'm up here in Italy at some place, and you know, it's on a veranda, and it's like, I think you do pretty well in terms of part-time consulting work. You got good gigs. Mine are typically in Bethesda, so it's not I obviously didn't get the mentoring from you. I should have. Pursuing further education. I think we've all well educated, thank you. Spending time with family and grandchildren. I think we've seen previous slides of you and Betsy spending time with grandchildren already, and I think you figured that one out. Volunteer work and community service. Okay. Now here, perhaps you could teach a wine appreciation class. Number 2, hobbies and personal interests. Like you could take up golf, tennis. I understand that Michigan goes through college coaches pretty quickly, so maybe you could do that. And number 1, travel. Oh, I think you got that covered. So I guess there's no reason to stop actually what you're doing. You know, it seems like there's really only one choice. Just do whatever it is that makes you happy and just don't worry about it. The one thing I do want to say is that, you know, in academic medicine or academia in general, it's a pretty stressful life sometimes. And you see, you know, people who have been married for like 50 years, and that's pretty unusual in some ways. It suggests that there is really some interest of things. And then you think about people you've been friends with for like 50 years. And you know, in this room, probably Mike and Nancy are the people I've been, you know, most associated with the longest. And you know, it's hard to think about doing this more without you guys. And so hopefully you'll still be around. So I think I've sort of wandered enough. I did want to do one thing, because when I first, oh yeah, here it is. When I first heard about this idea of retirement, and then I sat down with Mike last year at the ASHG meeting, and he said, well, you're going to come to my party, aren't you? It's a symposium they're going to put on. I said, yeah, sure, yeah, unless I'm, you know, someplace else. And then I saw Mike Epstein, and he said, oh, we're having this thing for Mike. I said, yeah, I know. And then Beth says, oh, can you come? I said, oh, I wouldn't miss it. You know, I'm thinking, I'm seeing all my friends, I'm seeing all the colleagues worked with over the years. So I'm certain there's going to be good food, good wine, and I'll just have a great time. And then they said, well, can you give a talk? And I said, what? You actually want me to work for this? And so a couple of weeks ago, I said, just checking, for my talk, do you want me to do science or personal reflections from over 30 years, or both, slides or conversation? I've been to a few of these things, it just depends. Beth sent this message. It's like when I first went to Virginia and signed my contract, there was a statement in the contract that said, you know, we're going to renovate space, and space will be renovated to Dr. Rich's desires. That was the last time they used that phrase in a contract. And so Beth said, both are fine. I think, however, the spirit moves you would work. And so my spirit works in different ways. And so this is the spirit that worked at this time. And so I think what I'll do is I'll leave you with the last song that came to mind. You know, I love the Kinks. Dave Davies, the guitar player, basically got his sound by taking a razor blade and running it across the amplifier, the speaker cabinets, and that's how he got the sound. And that's thinking out of the box, just like Mike. So I'll leave you this one last thing from the Bard of the Western Skies, Roy Rogers. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather. I don't know how well you sing, by the way. Happy trails to you till we meet again. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Mike.
That was great.
Thanks.